Welcome to my IBD Story. I'm Carissa, and I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis at age 15. I'm here to share my struggles and experiences in hopes to give you a better understanding of inflammatory bowel disease. Thank you for joining me. This first episode is going to be a little different. This episode, I'm going to give you my backstory on IBD. In future episodes, I will talk about different IBD topics in more detail. But for now, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. The first thing I'm going to discuss is the pre-diagnosis, and then I will go ahead and jump into the diagnosis. I will also talk about significant flare-ups and remission periods throughout my life, and then I'll touch on how I'm feeling today. So let's first start with the pre-diagnosis. I started experiencing stomach problems at a very early age. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I started to get these weird vomiting fits. Basically, I would vomit everything I ate, and I would continue to vomit until I was dry heaving. It was very unusual because it would only last for a day and then I'd be fine. It would happen only a couple times a year up until I was about 13 or 14 years old. It was really frustrating because I'd miss a lot of school and I didn't really know what the cause was. My parents took me to the pediatrician for it once, and they actually recommended to go to a GI doctor then, but we didn't go because it just didn't seem to be that big of a deal. At one point, we wondered if it was sinus related because I would vomit up mucus, so we went to go get my allergies tested, but they never really found anything. To this day, I'm not really sure if the vomiting had anything to do with my IBD, but I kind of think of it as the first sign of me having symptoms. I first started experiencing IBD-related symptoms when I was in the 9th grade. That was in 2010, and I first started experiencing abdominal bleeding around late October, early November of that year. The blood I found in the stool was very minimal at first, but over time it gradually increased. The interesting thing about my pre-diagnosis is that I decided to keep my symptoms a secret. My dad had recently changed jobs at this time, and I knew financially we weren't well. I also just really didn't want to go to the doctor. I also tried to diagnose myself, which I recommend you don't do. I would Google blood and stool, and the first thing that came up was hemorrhoids, and that's kind of just what I assumed I had. The longer you keep something a secret, the harder it is to tell. Another reason why I kept it a secret was because even though I was having a lot of abdominal bleeding, I wasn't experiencing a lot of abdominal pain. It didn't seem very serious to me. I kept up the secret for about a month, maybe a little bit longer than that. By then, I did start to experience terrible abdominal pain. When I finally told my parents about the bleeding, shortly after I was taken to the emergency room. At the emergency room, they ran a couple of tests and basically came to the conclusion that it was either ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. They also recommended to see a GI specialist. When I went to the GI specialist, they told me how I would be diagnosed, and that was with the colonoscopy. It took them a while to schedule that procedure, so I missed a lot of school during that period. The abdominal pain and bleeding got worse and worse, and eventually it was just pure pools of blood when I went to the bathroom. The night before the colonoscopy, I was very anemic. I was in a lot of pain, and I even started to get feverish. Because I had a fever, the doctors kind of stepped it up and scheduled the procedure faster. That night was the night before finals, and these were going to be the first ever finals I was taking because I was a freshman. My mom tried to convince me that night to go to school and take them, but I just couldn't do it. My dad woke me up the next morning and said, "You need to take these pills because you're having your colonoscopy tomorrow." So I took the Dopcolex tabs, and then I started the Gatorade prep later that afternoon, which is Gatorade and Miralax. The prep was hard to keep down, but I got all glasses except for the last one. The colonoscopy itself went over pretty smoothly. After the procedure was over, they told me that I had ulcerative colitis. The first things they prescribed me was prednisone and Lialda. It took a while for the prednisone to really kick in. I had the scope around the 20th of December, and by Christmas time I was still feeling terrible. I went to midnight mass, and I remember I had to leave and spend the night in the bathroom because the pain was that bad. Next, I'm going to talk about the significant flares and remission periods that I've had over the years. My flares were kind of on and off throughout high school. I always worried about missing school because it was really hard to make up homework, especially sophomore year and junior year. Eventually, my mom made a 504 plan with my teachers, and they established a set of accommodations for me. I was allowed to have some extra days to make up work if I missed. I was allowed to sit near the exit of the classroom in case I needed to use the bathroom. I was allowed more bathroom passes than others. I even took my ACT test in an isolated room. I felt pretty low-spirited when I was a junior because that's the year of high school where you really start to decide what college you want to go to and what you want to major in. It really just added to all the stress I was having. I was also prescribed different types of medication throughout high school. Some of these medications include Aprezo, 6-MP, hydrocortisone enemas, which I absolutely hated, and amitriptyline. I was also on and off prednisone throughout high school, which is difficult for a teenager because the side effects really affect your appearance. I reached a remission period when I was a senior, and that period lasted throughout my first year of college. I was very thankful for that because I went away from home my first year of college, and I didn't have to deal with any symptoms during that time. For my second year of college, I decided to transfer schools and head back home. During that summer, I got the worst flare that I've had so far. I got the flare after eating a strawberry chicken salad at Panera. Trigger foods are an interesting thing. Some patients say that certain foods do cause them to have flares, but there's no real confirmation behind it. At the time I was trying to take summer band, I actually had to quit during the middle of band camp because the flare was that bad. So I went to the doctor during the summer, and my doctor kept prescribing hydrocortisone enemas for weeks, and they weren't really helping. Eventually, I decided to switch doctors and see a more adult-oriented GI specialist. When I went to go see the new GI specialist, the first thing she wanted to do was another colonoscopy. So we did another scope, and then from then on, it's been kind of a trial and error of seeing what medications work and which ones don't. It took about until the spring for me to start on a new medication. The first thing we tried was a medicine called Symphony, which is a self-injection. I actually had the option to choose between an injection and an infusion. I chose the injection because I thought it was more efficient and more affordable. I was on the Symphony for a couple months. In the summer, I noticed that it just wasn't working. My doctor then scheduled a flex sigmoidoscopy. During the week of that scope, I started to get really sick. I had trouble keeping food down, and I had really bad abdominal bleeding. I called in the doctor then, and they just said to hold it out until my flex sigmoidoscopy. The night before, I had a fever and terrible chills. It was an awful experience, especially with doing the prep. When I got done with the scope, my doctor said my colon looked terrible. She decided to refer me to the hospital then because I was so sick and mainly dehydrated. I was in the hospital for a couple days. What I hated the most about it was just the feeling of feeling so helpless. I got out of the hospital the day before my junior year of college was about to start. I hated that because I just felt so unprepared, but I got up and I went and did it. I started another biologic after that called Remicade. It was an infusion. It required me to go into the clinic for 3 hours with an IV. I was on Remicade for about a year. This past July, I went to go see the GI specialist again. She decided to do another flex sigmoidoscopy, and we decided that there wasn't as much change from the Remicade. After that, she started me on Entyvio, which is another type of infusion. That's what I'm on right now. It's been a couple months, and so far it seems to be working really well. I really hope that this medication puts me into remission for a while. Thank you for sticking with me. I know that was a long backstory. For the next episode, I'll go more in depth with the trial and error of medications. I will go more into detail with the different types of medications as well as how to cope with changing medications. Thank you for listening to my IBD story. Tune in next time to hear more about my battle with ulcerative colitis.